a couple familiar names, so this may be a repeat, but we're going to be using Adobe. As you know, we're in the room right now. The slides will be presented kind of in the middle here, so please keep an eye on that throughout the session. You can enlarge that pod if you can't see it quite well if you're on a smaller computer. You can see an attendee list on the right, so if you see a colleague and you want to say hello, please feel free to do so in the chat box, which is on the left. And I see Lori has inserted some files, so those will be available to you as well if you click on those on the lower left-hand side. If you need us to, if you have any questions, need us to slow down, speed up, or want to maybe just give us an applause, there's also that function as well on the top. Also, if you should encounter any technical difficulties, please know you can click on the Help button, and that will offer you a wealth of information to try and solve those issues, but hopefully that won't happen today. All right, so over the next hour, we want to talk to you about just the term start, identifying tasks that you need to complete before the term starts. A lot of our work is up front before the students even enter the classroom. And, also we want to discuss maybe adapting your teaching techniques in a classroom with various levels of students, maybe students with different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different maybe languages. I've had students who English is not their first language, nor was it their second or third language. They're multilingual and picked up English later on. So just adapting your techniques to techniques that work best in the classroom. We also want to determine an effective level of engagement for the first week of class. As you all know, first impressions are the most important. So just the ways to welcome our students so they want to come back for weeks 2, 3, 4, and the rest in the semester. And also just strategies to be successful with students. So let's talk a little bit, and you can see on the screen about why the first week is so important. I always I have a picture sometimes I use, and it's not in this slide deck, but I always try to say, when you were younger, think back in grade school, and you entered a classroom, first day of class, wasn't it exciting when you entered a classroom and it was decorated? The teacher was there with a big smile on his or her face with a decorated classroom. Now, try going into that same classroom where maybe the teacher's there, but really maybe not looking at you or hasn't really decorated anything, and the walls are just blank and it's kind of a blah classroom. I think we would all agree that we probably want to go in that first classroom rather than the second classroom, because we want to feel welcomed. We want to feel like, wow, the teacher's prepared for us. The teacher's excited about this, because decorating your classroom, basically including your contact information, a wonderful announcement to welcome the students, that really shows the students, wow, my teacher's actually excited to be here for me. They're not just here because they have to be. So that first week of school, the term, it really builds a sense of community, and we're going to talk about icebreakers later on. Lori Bedford has a handout that here again is in this lower left-hand side that has some great ideas for icebreakers. I use them myself when I teach, and it really helps kind of start things on a nice pace. We can introduce tools. Some classrooms use different tools than other classrooms. Some classrooms maybe require videos, and so it's nice to familiarize students with those extra features if maybe they're not used to using them. It also sets expectations. Being actively involved and being present shows the students that, you're present, you kind of want them present too. So it's really important to relay and convey that message to students by the way you demonstrate yourself with your actions in the classroom. It levels the playing field. So here again, if you have students coming in from various backgrounds, maybe you're teaching a first-term course and you have students who haven't been in college for a long time, or maybe you have students that have. Maybe they just finished a degree in online education and are just transitioning to their next step. But it really levels things that first week of class, because you offer kind of almost like an orientation, if you will, to what is offered in the class by being present and offering those messages and letting the students know what to expect. So the students can really focus on the learning outcomes. So I would like to launch a quick poll here, and Lori, you may have to do this unless
I sure can.
Do this. Okay, perfect. Thank you. What is your most significant challenge during the first week of a course? And Lori has launched the poll. If you can just check one, that would be great. So I'll just read what they are. Having the classroom prepared, is that one of your biggest challenges the first week of the course? Handling different levels of student confidence, setting and modeling expectations, finding the right level of engagement in the classroom, or finding the time to do all of the above? Give everyone a few more minutes. We have 22 on the line. We have about 10 who have responded, so about half of you have responded. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Looks like setting and modeling expectations seems to be very popular. Nope, somebody changed it. Finding time to do all of the above.
Can I go ahead and end that, Lita?
That would be fantastic. Thanks, Lori.
Okay. Do you want it closed yet, or did you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Setting and modeling expectations seems to be the kind of the winner here. However, there was not a single choice had a 0. So and that makes me happy because hopefully we'll all get something out of this next hour on how to overcome maybe some of the challenges within the first week of the course. But setting and modeling expectations, it's huge because if you convey that your expectations are low, the students will start that term, and if you increase your expectations throughout the term, they will have a hard time meeting that, and that's just human nature, and I think we've all been in a situation where expectations change. So I think one thing here at Walden and in the classroom to be a best practice is to be consistent with the expectations that you expect across the board. So there's really no surprise. And every term, I think, you kind of gauge yourself from the previous term, but as you practice more, I don't know how many of you are first term, and I probably should have asked a question wondering if there are any first term instructors, but I see a few, like Judith Blakely and a few other people in here that have been around for a while. You know that how to gauge the expectations based on all of your previous experience. Wonderful. I see some dialogue in the box, but I don't think any comments on that. Does anyone have a comment that they want to add regarding this?
I'm just going to note, I'm hearing just a little bit of background noise, so if you're on the phone, if you could just mute yourself, that would be great. Thanks.
Thanks.
I'll go ahead and hide that, Lita, so you can go on.
Wonderful. Okay. All right, so we have the chat box, and I see it's active. Megan mentioned she tries to give students all of her expectations, model, post, etc., but students don't often read what I provide. And Megan, that's a universal issue. It's something we hear, and I honestly heard that in a traditional setting as well. You know, I'd hand out handouts when I used to work face-to-face, and students would not know what I was talking about when I referred to those handouts a class or two later. So getting their attention, and I you know, there's different techniques, and I certainly, if some of you have some strategies that you use in your classroom to get them to engage more, please do. I know I send a message out in the program I teach. We use the journal function. I have everyone. I can't obviously make it a requirement because it's not part of the tasks and expectations of the course. But I gently urge them to respond and to various posts that I make, and I get a really good response rate with that. So, and you could do the same using the email function. Email the class, you know, please respond to this email if you received this, and let me know if you have one question, or let me know one comment about the email I've sent. And that seems to work. Of course, sometimes it's not always 100%, but it certainly gets them reading and realizing that you do care if they respond. Yes, Amy, sometimes you send an email and they do not read it. You're right. So I typically, if I want a message sent out to the whole entire class, I'll send it, you know, in the announcements like you all do, and, you know, do the follow-up email. So they're getting it in the announcements, they're getting it in the email, and sometimes within the discussion board, I'll put a little note in there as well. Hey, check in the announcements or something really important, or, you know, just kind of lead them to go back there and check things out. Have a course properly receive a course offer early on so I can prepare the course. Yes, very good, very good. And, you know, sometimes courses will lose an instructor last minute. That's happened to me where I had literally 2 hours to prepare my course because an instructor couldn't do it at the last minute. I actually had a course once where the instructor had to get deployed and had to stop teaching 3 weeks into it. So yes, having time. But as you all know, you can have your items kind of composed and ready to go. So like your bio and whatnot, I keep those in a file. So I just cut and paste and update when I need to for my bio information and I'm teaching the same course over and over, my general announcement. So that helps a lot. I use the lounge to have students introduce themselves. Yes, very nice, Judith. That lounge is fantastic. And just keeping it going. Sometimes if there's a residency coming up in a program, I'll bing an announcement, hey, everyone meet in the lounge and see who's going to residency. Because as we all know, that class cafe, it's very active at first, but then it kind of dies down. So that's a great suggestion, Judith, kind of bringing them back there to have a casual discussion with each other. Connor, what time delay do you suggest between a warm, welcoming place and setting expectations? Announce with an email, copy and post. I set my expectations day one. I have it all set. It's a very kind of a long announcement post, but I have it. I set it from day one. So, Kona, that's kind of my suggestion. I mean, it's a warm welcome, but also it's a warm but firm welcome. And I can always send you a copy of that if you ever want to see mine, Kana. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to add on what they do? Okay, somebody in the previous slide, time, fitting it all in, that was something that a few of you selected. So I just want to say managing your time, maybe setting blocks of time aside. So as you would if you were teaching in a face-to-face class. So you have certain blocks of time where you know you're going to be checking into your classroom, because the online world, we all know there's tomorrow, but tomorrow is day 3, tomorrow is day 4, and we have a duty to our students to get in there and do things today. So setting maybe blocks of time aside where you'll be online, and students notice that. They notice if you're in the classroom posting early in the morning or late at night, or and they then know kind of what to expect and maybe when to post to you as well based on your behavioral patterns in the classroom. All right. Lori, I think at this point I am turning it over to one of you, unless I'm going over this slide as well.
Oh, I think you're turning it over to me. Thank you.
Wonderful. There you go.
So Walden has a few expectations per our handbook to make sure that you have your classroom set up. And these are pretty basic things, but these are things that Walden says you must do. So you need to put your bio, your contact information, and an optional photo in the Contact Your Instructor area. You need to post office hours as part of your instructor information. You can give a range of hours. You can ask for appointments, just how it is that, and when should students expect to be able to contact you. You should post an introduction and respond to students in the class cafe. And if you have groups in your class, if your class has some groups 1 week or 2, you should assign those the very first week by Friday and let students know. So pretty minimal stuff, again, per the handbook. But best practice is to do some additional things. As Lita said, if you're in the classroom, your students expect you to be standing in front of the classroom and they come in the first day. And here's some announcements. But more than likely, as an experienced, dedicated faculty member, you're going to have lots of other things ready for students. And so here's some of the things that you might think about. We're going to talk about these in a little bit more detail, but some of the things you might think about in addition to what Walden's basic expectations are. So kind of think about these things, and let's talk about them as we go through them a little bit. So the first one that we really want to talk about is preparing for the course. And one of the things that I want to say is that, there are some ways to create efficiency, and there's some good ways to manage your time. But the week before, the very first week, those first couple weeks of the term are just going to be a busy time. and there's just going to be more likely more work than there may be in later parts of the term. So part of time management is recognizing that and setting time aside for that, knowing that those first 2 weeks are going to be busy and figuring out in your schedule where you're going to fit that. So time management is an issue, and I will say also that, and I have found that devoting a little bit more time in the first 2 weeks creates a much more smooth sailing throughout the end of the term. So, I think a little extra time at the beginning really balances out at the end. So I would say in terms of time management, that's probably the biggest thing, is just know that there's going to be a little bit more expected from you the first couple of weeks. But to maximize your time, one of the things is really to be organized. And many of you that I see here today are experienced veteran faculty, and I would venture to guess, you can go ahead and type into the chat room, but I would venture to guess that most of you have files with frequently asked questions from students, with announcements that you repurpose. Yes, I'm getting some yeses. Various things, examples that you post in the classroom. Perhaps some are specific to a course, others are maybe more general. And I think it's fine. We talk a lot about individualizing comments and individualizing responses to students, and we want to do that. But I think it's fine to repurpose some materials. If in the last term you have found that students stumble over a certain concept or a certain assignment, there's absolutely nothing wrong with posting something in the first week, or even just a few weeks before that assignment due, or when that concept is introduced, to give students a little bit more information. That minimizes questions, it minimizes student frustration, minimizes students asking to redo assignments, just to be proactive about that. Judy, yes, you call it your teacher toolkit, and I think I've heard you talk about that. Thanks for sharing that with us. And that works when you have taught a course for a while, when it's your second, third, fourth time teaching a course. But we all know, if you've taught for a while, that the first, I think, in my opinion, it's about the first 3 times. You have to teach a course 3 times before you really get it under your belt. So if you're teaching a course the first or second time, reach out to your lead faculty members with questions. Ask your lead faculty member, where have they seen students stumble? Great question, Con. I'm going to stop right there. How do you do this without students thinking or claiming that you're changing the course requirements? You know what? I've had students accuse me of that as well. In the discussions, what I'll do, particularly discussions that are really robust, I'll post early in the week and I'll say, some other things to think about are A, B, C, and D. And so then, when someone asks me, I just clearly say, I am clarifying the assignments. It's exactly the way it's written. The rubrics are the same. The expectations are the same. I'm just clarifying for you, what they are, so that if you have questions about that. Yeah, students will ask, and I think that's a good call out, and I just try to be very clear with them that, in those discussion postings too, that's not a requirement to respond to those questions, but if you're looking for something more to say, if everybody has already answered the question, here's some other things that you can talk about and still meet the requirements. So good question, good call out. Other people have ideas, go ahead and type those into the chat, or Melissa, Lita, jump in if you have ideas with that as well. So again, your lead faculty member or many of your colleagues will also help you with those announcements, those frequently asked questions, those places where students get tripped up, they might need some help. Post documents and doc sharing, Amy said. I agree with that. And then, the other thing is if you post maybe an article on a concept or a link to a YouTube video that further describes something, let students know all of those things are optional. If you've already got a pretty good handle on this and you want to extend your learning, here's some ways to do that. If you need some remediation, here's some ways to do that. But all that, let them know that that's optional. the last part is, and I'm not going to ask you all to post or to raise your hand, but think about the extent to which you review all the materials. If you've been teaching a while and you're a subject matter expert in whatever it is you're teaching, do you really read the entire textbook word for word? I know not everyone does. You get strapped for time, and you're pretty sure you know what the textbook says, and your intentions are to read it over the term if you've never read it before, to go back and review it. But it's a good idea really to read that textbook, to know what's in there, to know what isn't in there, so that you can fill in some of those gaps for students if there are some concepts or perhaps some contemporary ideas that you can share. I tell my students not to read the textbook word for word. Well, that's a good call out, Kana. Not word for word, but to know what's in there and what's not in there is my point. So thank you for calling that out. Some first week facilitation strategies. Again, plan grading time so that you can return that really quickly in the first week, and that might even flow into that second week of class. I try to do grading Monday morning, particularly in that first week. Students are they're anxious, and they want to know that they're doing well, and if they're not, they want to know why not. One of the things that I do, not always, but I really try to do, is mid to late week, after everyone has posted in the discussion, I send them an email about their participation thus far and say, here's what you did well in the discussion, here's where you might be a little bit more thorough in your description, and really tell them if they're on or not. It helps students feel more reassured, and I've had students say that they appreciate that. But again, that's a lot of work, sending each student email, and in terms of time management, we don't always have time. Something to think about. The other thing in discussions, I always try to get in there early, and sometimes I post something a couple days before the first posting is due. Other times I will, especially that first week, maybe respond to the first couple of people, those early posters, and give the other students an idea of the quality of that post. Very carefully crafted, of course. You don't want to call out a student who has not written a good post, but perhaps pose some questions about how the student might extend his or her response and also model then to the other students. I'm going to go back here a couple other comments. Kana's had a couple dyslexic students not quit because I taught them to harvest the textbook. Yep, good strategies. Always help students who have a variety of needs. And Jim says, I encourage students to review the appropriate rubrics, since the rubric will highlight the key strategic issues. And, I think that's really the key, Jim. So when you post optional or additional information, if you clarify something about the assignment, it still has to align with the rubric. So the bottom line is, you're not changing the assignment. It's really about the rubric, and that's how they're going to be graded in the end. In the files box down at the lower left hand, I think we said that the second resource down there is, I think, 4 pages of some resources, some ideas, and part of that are some sample announcements. Feel free to take those, use them, revise them, just some things that you might think about in terms of helping students that first week, setting expectations, and make sure that you're modeling what you expect. Tips for posting to the discussion board. That's not always clear in the guidance for the students, and the nuances of that are that instructors do have some different nuances and some different preferences, and so let students know what that is. Here's what I'd like to see in the discussion board. The rubric says this. Here's some examples of how you might meet that. We talked about discussing participation and grading, and then, to me, the best discussion guidance is to get in there early and to provide responses to students that reflect the way that what you would like to see, and to encourage students, again, who have modeled that, and to encourage students also who have not, might have some gaps, and give them an opportunity to come back and fill in. The last thing I wanted to just talk about briefly are doing some icebreakers. In the resources document, in the files section, I made a list of a few. I think especially in the latter courses of a program, students kind of know each other. They've been in many of the same courses together, and so the traditional introduce yourself, tell me where you're from, some of that stuff gets old. It isn't to you because you're the instructor and it might be the first time you've met them, but to each other it might be. So some different things, do some different things to get to know students and give them a different way to interact with each other. The second one, learning objectives, is something I just want to point out. Someone had suggested that to me as a way to get students to read the syllabus. And so the point is to have students identify one or two learning objectives from the syllabus that they really, really want to master in this course, and tell us why. Again, it makes the students download that syllabus and at least look at it. Questions or other comments before we move on? Okay, so with that, I think we are going to turn it over to Melissa. And yeah, if you have questions or comments, I see some folks typing, just go ahead and we'll talk about those as we are moving forward. Couple things, pick a word that describes them. Very nice icebreaker, Amy. And kind of where do you do the icebreaker? I do it in the student lounge. Instead of introduce yourself, or I might say, introduce yourself, tell us, some basic information about yourself, and then do the icebreaker, so it's right there in the student lounge. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Lori. So Lori and Lita have both shared some great tips for preparing this all-important first week of class. And as you've heard in some of the examples, a lot of it even requires, a few days before the class actual starts, maybe the week before that, just in terms of getting all your materials together and prepping. So one thing that's very, very important in the online classroom, and particularly during week one, is instructor presence. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what that means for the online classroom. So the question is, how do you define instructor presence? And you can feel free to type your response into the chat area, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you if you'd like to unmute yourself and talk. So again, how do you define instructor presence as it pertains to the online classroom? And then how do you demonstrate that presence during the first week of class? And I see a number of people typing. Okay, Connor says for week one, she has a Cultura video welcome and a bio post in the class cafe along with her contact information, engaging and responding to the discussion questions in the student bios. Richard says being present and responding in a timely manner to posts, class cafe, and any comments provided. Amy mentions she demonstrates presence by responding to everyone's discussion posts. Okay, those are all very good ways to demonstrate presence. Laura says that instructors need to make themselves visible throughout the course. Totally agree, that's very important. And pretty much the same thing, engaging and responding to students, providing virtual office hours, which is important. Jelena mentions introducing herself and welcoming students, providing an outline for the first lesson. Let's see what else. Jim says to greet each student individually with a brief welcome note. So yeah, so everyone is sort of on the same page in terms of defining instructor presence and sort of how they do it. One thing that I like to remind faculty is that in the online classroom, your only visibility are the footprints that you leave behind. And the footprints are anything that you post in the classroom, be it an announcement, your introduction, your responses to the students in the student lounge, your posting and responses in the discussion board. So, for example, and the reason why this is so important is because as you know, teaching online, can require a lot of time. You may go online that first day, let's say course starts on a Monday, and you're reading through all of the students' introductions in the course lounge, in the student lounge. Maybe you don't respond to any, or maybe you only respond to a few, but you may have spent an hour sitting there reading everyone's introduction. Unless you respond and leave some sort of footprint to the student, it may seem like you're not there, when in fact you have spent an enormous amount of time reviewing their responses. And the same goes for the discussion board. So throughout the week, if a student knows, especially during that first week, that you're there, they're going to understand that you are sort of on top of things and that you're engaging with them in the course. And really, it'll make them feel like there is someone there teaching the course, as opposed to them just sort of logging in and reading course material and responding to back and forth to their colleagues. Yes, Kana points out that the bio responses need to show that you've actually read their bio. Dina says responding to every student. She uses the audio feature, which a number of you had mentioned, and then marking a bio read after you've replied to it. Very good. So yeah, you get the idea. I just wanted to point that out because I know that we can spend a lot of time in a course, particularly when we're grading and reviewing the weekly discussion boards, but unless you respond to students and you respond regularly, it will seem as if you're not there, even though really you are. So thank you all for sharing that. Part of getting a class off to a great start is building a community in your classroom, and it seems that all of the examples that you all have given in the chat area lets me know that this group is very engaged with their students and really trying to build those connections with students from the very beginning. These may be three types of students that you're familiar with seeing. There's that anxious student, there's one that's a collaborative leader, and then there's also the controller. And we just have a few ideas in terms of how to deal with these students and maybe even how to avoid some of their behavior. So you may have the student who, you've just received your course, you've just set it up, students have just gotten access the Thursday before the course starts, and probably moments after you set it up, you have an email from that student or a post in the student lounge that says something, hi, Dr. So-and-so, oh my God, I'm so nervous about this course. I looked at week 6 and I don't understand the writing assignment. I looked at week 2 and I'm not really sure, what group I'm going to be in. So it's almost, that anxious student is the one who is sort of overwhelmed, and before the class has already started, or sometimes even just as the class is starting, they're sort of already nervous about what's going on. And so earlier, when I believe it was Lita talked about sort of getting ahead of that curve, and Lori also spoke about that, once you've taught a class a number of times, you start to get to know at what point in the class students get stuck on things, or maybe they don't understand a particular concept, or there is a particular assignment that, tends to trip them up. Also, courses that require groups, particularly the ones that require students to be in a group during week 1 and an assignment is due on that upcoming Sunday. It is so important to get those groups set up ahead of time, as well as post an announcement letting students know that groups have been created, and providing them with a list, and letting them know that they'll be working in groups, and so they know which of their colleagues to reach out to. So those are some ways that you can alleviate students who may be somewhat anxious and nervous, and then also always providing just an email response to that person or that student to let them know, it's okay, maybe instead of looking ahead to week 6 when we're only on day 1 isn't such a good idea, but instead just sort of take a look, an overview of the syllabus to kind of understand where you're going to be going and what assignments are due, but then start at day 1 and with assignment 1 and move on from there. Amy says, help anxious student who sends email after email after email. Yes, there are those, and there are those students. And I think something that also can help with that is, again, just being there to answer student questions. And also, you may want to think about creating a frequently asked question list. Again, for courses that you are used to teaching, you sort of know the questions that always come up every time you teach the class. Think about going ahead and, just creating a PDF document or a Word document that has those common questions with the answer up front. And when you send out that welcome email, a few days before the class starts or on the day that it starts, the students will sort of have that information. Sometimes it also helps to post that document in the student lounge as well, or in the contact the instructor area. That's where I typically post mine, is in the contact the instructor area. But I also send it in an email in that welcome letter as well. Conda asked, what about the student who says email after email that they are not going to be able to do work on time? Well, that's part of the responsibility of a student, to be honest with you. The expectations are laid out for the course. A student has to be prepared to take the course and to turn in assignments on time. You always have those situations where, something comes up, you have family emergencies and things like that, but if it's really just, hey, I just started this course and I'm not going to have time to do any of this, that's, then that's a totally different conversation, and that may be someone that you want to suggest that they speak to their student advisor to see whether or not this is either the best time to take this course, or they may have some other things to think about. And setting those expectations up front is also helpful for things like that, so that students understand when things are due and what your expectations are for their work. I've also heard, and this is something that you would need to check with your program directors about and your lead faculty before doing this, but I know that in one of the webinars that we delivered, I've heard from a couple faculty say that they have sort of like this one time you can turn in something late. It's sort of like a late card. You get it one time, you can use it at any point in the class. And there doesn't have to be a reason. And I forget how it was organized, but I think it was something like you can turn in an assignment one day late, and it's kind of like a get out of jail free card. Amy, there you go. You say I do that. So that's that is something too that sort of, again, puts the responsibility on the student. So it's almost as if you're saying, okay, I'm giving you this one opportunity, to turn something in late. I know that things come up. We know that students have full-time jobs and families and children and personal things going on. So that may be another way to quell some of those issues. Another type of student that we have is a collaborative leader, and that is someone who sometimes, you can tell they just always want to help out, particularly when it comes to group work. And not that this is necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes you just sort of have to monitor it, because there are students sometimes, much like the controller as well, who will literally want to just sort of take over the class as the instructor. I have found, though, that faculty presence is important for these two types of people. So the more that you are present and engaged in answering student questions, the less you'll have issues with this kind of student. For example, even especially with the controller, if a faculty member, may not have posted anything for 3 or 4 days, not to say that they haven't logged in, but maybe they just haven't posted anything, so students think that the faculty member is not there, or questions go unanswered. You may notice that another student, let's just say a student logs in to contact the instructor and posts a question about an assignment or a question that they have just in general about the course. And if another student goes in who sort of has this, collaborative leader or controller attitude, they may jump in to answer the questions and, start to try to take the lead. So again, I think that just staying in front of these things, making sure that you answer student questions in a timely manner, engage your students, and provide expectations up front. I think that these are all things that can sort of calm these students down and really allow them to just focus on taking the course. So before we move on, are there any other suggestions or comments or maybe even questions that anyone has about sort of getting ready and getting prepared for this first week of class and why it's so important? Okay. So then I'd like for you all to share, and you can type this in the chat area, any new idea that you gained from this webinar that you plan to implement next term. And while I'm waiting for those to come in, Lori mentioned that in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a little box that's labeled Files For, and there are two things there. There is a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, and there's also a resource document. You will definitely want to click on that and download it so that you can save it because it has a lot of these tips that we talked about. Okay, Amy says the PDF for the frequently asked questions. Yeah, Amy, I find that document is very helpful, and it reduces the number of questions that I get throughout the term because essentially they've all been answered up front. Yep, kind of mentions being upfront about the one free late card. Richard's going to try an icebreaker. Judith learned about teacher presence and having regular communication, creating an Excel spreadsheet where I can keep any special notes about students that have responded, what I need to remember. Laura, that's actually a good point. That's something that we didn't talk about. But yeah, having, sort of keeping your own notes, especially for the discussion board, depending how many students you have in your class, in any one given week, you can just have a discussion board full of discussion posts, 50 plus. And so creating, an Excel spreadsheet or a Word sheet or, even if you just have your own notebook that you handwrite your notes, you definitely, it's a good idea to sort of keep track who you've responded to, how many times you responded to them so that you, make sure that you vary who you respond to each week and that you are not focused on any one student or any one group of students because sometimes it is easy to gravitate to the student who posts early and often. And when we do that, that can allow others to fall through the cracks or others to feel like, the instructor never responds to me or, what I post is not important because I never get a comment on it. So that's, thank you for sharing that, Laura. Megan says she plans on sharing the resource guide PDF with her faculty as a course lead, trying new icebreakers. Kana says she's happy to know she's not the only one worried about these issues. Yeah, Kana, I think, these are very common things that we hear from faculty all the time. Linda plans on documenting the activity of each student, sending emails to let them know how they're doing or how to improve. I'm sure your students will appreciate that. Track weekend student engagement. Yep, setting expectations, making a list of who you've responded to. So yeah, I mean, you all have some pretty good ideas, and it sounds like that you are going to share some ideas with one another as well. So that's great. As I shared, we have some further resources that are in the attachment in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and there you'll find some of the sample announcements that Lori spoke about, as well as the icebreakers and just further general resources that you might have. You can also reach out to any of us at any time. As Lita shared in the beginning, we all support various colleges and centers, And, you know, you can reach out to us as needed. We're happy to help you. We also do faculty coaching, which is, you know, just a way for you all to meet with us one-on-one and maybe run some things by us for our input in terms of teaching in the classroom. Lori and Lita, do you have any additional information to add or last comment?
You know, I think you have covered it quite well. I know with the faculty coaching, Melissa helped spearhead this with, we're collaborating now with the Writing Center. And so if any of you do have some multilingual students in your class that maybe you're struggling with maybe they're struggling with writing, you're maybe struggling with interacting with them on how to find help for their writing, please feel free to reach out for coaching. It's Amy Bach, correct? Who is a coach now in the Writing Center who can really offer you some fabulous resources. So please do take advantage of that as well.
Yes, and I've just posted the link to register for coaching if that's something that you're interested in. And do know that it is confidential. It is just a conversation between colleagues, and it's not something that, you know, we share with program directors or anything like that. It's definitely something that just stays between you and whoever you meet with, whether it's myself, Lita, or Lori. Amy says, can she send her EDD students? I think you're referring to coaching. The coaching is only for faculty. So that's the support resources that we only provide to faculty, not to students. So sorry about that. I know.
But there is a wealth of information for students out there. And Amy, yeah, it would be a separate email to Amy, but she might be able to point you in the direction if you wanted to set up a meeting with her to find out some resources.
Yeah, Amy, there are, there's the Academic Skills Center and the Center for Student Success has so many resources for students as well as tutoring and all that kind of stuff. So that may be the direction you'll need to steer them in. Okay, unless there are any final questions or thoughts or concerns, we would like to thank you all for joining us today, and we'll be sending out a copy of this recording, and then we also would like you to take a moment to complete the survey. On the screen you'll see the link. Taking that survey really provides us with some good feedback and helps us adjust our presentations and also gives us ideas for future topics to share with you all. So thank you all again for joining, and have a good afternoon or good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.